My name is Dave Elving. I'm the interim director here at San Francisco Camerawork. Thanks to all of you for being here and being a part of our programming. It's really exciting to gather digitally, even as we can't be together in the physical gallery. While we're all here at the outset for this event, this week is actually a really big week for us. We have a couple of events coming up. Join us again tomorrow for a conversation between Adrian Walker and Curtis Taylor Jr. They'll be discussing what it means to be a Black creative today. So that is tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific time here in California. Also coming up on Thursday, August 20th, we have our August members critique, this time being led by Wassam Al-Badri. So we're looking forward to that. We have people who have already agreed to show their work, but there's plenty of room to actually come in and view the work that people are sharing. And then on September 1st, we're excited to have an artist talk with Keisha Lucas. That's also coming up at 6 p.m. So it's great to see you tonight. We hope to see you in the future. As always, we will be recording this conversation, so if you prefer not to appear, you can always turn your camera off. If you would like to ask questions later on, you're welcome to do that and turn your camera on. You can also ask questions through the chat. It's often the easiest way. So if you put a question in the chat, towards the end, we will ask them. So feel free to participate. With that, I'm excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Michelle Branch. Michelle is the board president of San Francisco Camerawork, and she collects contemporary artworks. And in 2002, she first learned about collecting through San Francisco Camerawork. In her professional life, Michelle manages a boutique law firm where she represents founders, emerging companies, and investors. She holds undergraduate and law degrees from Stanford University and a master's and a doctorate in 19th century United States history from the University of California, Berkeley. Michelle received a dissertation research fellowship from Harvard University and has taught law and history as a visiting faculty member at UC Berkeley and at NYU Law School. Michelle also serves on the board of Oregon Shakespeare Festival and as the chair of United Way Worldwide's Women United Global Leadership Council. Michelle, thank you so much for being our board president, and I'll hand it off to you to introduce our guests.
Great, thanks Dave, I really appreciate it. It's really wonderful to see everybody here today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really thrilled. I've been really excited to host today. I've been really excited to get to know Carla a little bit more and to see her work, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but let me give some introductions first. So today we'll be hearing from Carla Jay Harris and Brenda Stevenson. Carla was born in Indianapolis, but she was raised traveling the globe as a child of a military officer. And for that reason, her social and artistic development was impacted tremendously by the geopolitical and natural environments that she encountered. She fervently believes that space, both physical and physiological, has a fundamental, lasting impact on personal identity. And while the environment around us is constantly evolving, photography has the power to capture humanity in a place, in a moment, transforming a flicker in time into a lasting, appreciable statement. Carla's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally in New York, LA, DC, Paris, and Quebec. And she completed undergraduate coursework at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, received her bachelor's degree with distinction from the University of Virginia, and her MFA from UCLA in 2015. She currently lives and works in Los Angeles, and her works are included in many collections, including the University of Southern California Fisher Museum collection. The California African American Museum in Los Angeles recently acquired a work from Carla, which is exciting. The Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, California, the Museum of Fine Arts in Sherbrooke, Quebec, and Johns Hopkins University Law School, and numerous other private collections. She also has a mural that's been commissioned by the city and county of Los Angeles, which I'm excited to hear more about too. So that's exciting because that'll be going up next week, I think. And Carla is represented by Luis de Jesus Gallery in Los Angeles. Brenda Stevenson, Brenda E. Stevenson, Ph.D. is the Nickel Family Endowed Chair in the Department of History and a professor of African American Studies at UCLA. She's a social historian whose work centers on gender, race, family, and social conflict in America and the Atlantic world from the colonial period through the late 20th century. Professor Stevenson's research has been supported by numerous organizations, including just a few here, the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the National Humanities Center, Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences, the American Academy in Berlin, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the American Association of University Women, the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, and the University of California's Chancellor's Office. Her publications include the award-winning books Life in Black and White, Family and Community in the Slave South, The Contested Murder of Latasha Harlins, Justice, Gender, and the Origins of the LA Riots, and also What is Slavery, and the journals of Charlotte Fortin Grimke, and numerous co-authored, co-edited works, journals, articles, and book chapters. So I'm really grateful to have the opportunity today to really showcase this work. In particular, we're going to focus on a series called Bitter Earth, which is a collaboration between Professor Stevenson and Carla. If I may say, they are related in that Professor Stevenson is Carla's aunt. And so I think it's really interesting for them to, work together as family members and also as, a visual artist and a historian. And so those are some of the questions that I have. I'm really fascinated. So to kick it off, I'll say, Carla, I first saw your work on the platform LA. Platform LA. And I reached out to Luis immediately to learn more about your work and of course you, and that was probably a couple months ago. And then, I was reading more and I was again thrilled to learn that Professor Stevenson's your aunt, and I was just really blown away. Had a lot of curiosity about your project and how it began, and so wanted to invite you here. So it really is my pleasure to have you here. So what we're gonna do today, everyone, is I'm gonna ask you, Carla, to introduce your work and to share it with us through Zoom. And then we'll do that for however long you'd like, and then we can start to move into Q&A. And guests, if you have questions, feel free to add those to the chat. We'll be starting off with some questions that we prepared in advance. And then also I'm happy to take questions by chat.
All right, wonderful. Michelle, thank you so much. Thank you so much to the audience here who've joined us. I always appreciate when people take time to learn about my work and show an interest in my work. So thank you all. I'm really grateful and glad to see that you've joined. As Michelle mentioned, we're going to be discussing the collaborative work or the collaboration between myself and my aunt Brenda. I'm going to just kick it off by giving just a little bit more background about my work and my process. And then Brenda will share some information about her work and history and how she came to this project as well. And then we're gonna open it up for questions. I hope you guys are full of questions. I always like, I'm always curious about how the audience or any audience responds to my work. So give me 1 second here. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. All right, Michelle, would you mind just confirming that you can see my screen? You can. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs, so a thumbs up, so I'm guessing that means yes. Okay. All right, Bitter Earth. So just to give you a bit more background about me and my process, I feel like this work is like sort of a key example of how I'm working now, and what it really doesn't make sense without the context of how I got here. So I was really trained as a photographer. My background is in sort of documentary style photography. And for many, many years, I was just kind of strictly using the camera, doing straight documentary style work, and really just kind of doing some experimentation in the darkroom, some experimentation with film, but that really was just a very, very small part of my practice. I always had an interest in storytelling and narrative work though. And over the years, just having a straight photographic practice just started to feel a bit binding. Like I wasn't really just feeling the passion anymore. And this is the work that I do because I'm passionate about it. And so when you start to feel a little bit more lukewarm, then something is amiss. So I decided to sort of spend some time, went to grad school. I was in the photo program at UCLA, and while I was there, I started to experiment a bit more with alternative processes. Started bringing in some drawing, some collaboration, some illustration, painting, and sort of that sort of tumultuous process of sort of figuring out a better way to work to where I felt like I was getting more, how should I put it? So I always felt like when I was behind the camera, it was kind of like a scavenger hunt, like I was going out there trying to find in the world the picture in my mind. And by sort of transitioning to this new process, I feel like I had more control. Like it was easier, I was more effective in creating that picture in my mind's eye, sort of translating what I want to say from my interior to the exterior. And so this sort of new way of working is really sort of the result of that, and I'm much more excited about it. I feel like it's much more true to my vision, and sort sort of that's where Bitter Earth began, with sort of that process of moving from straight photography into more alternative style work. So Bitter Earth itself, as I mentioned, is a collaboration between myself and Brenda. Sort of I led up sort of the visual piece. It's a wallpaper. It's installation that's designed to be site specific, but ideally will fill an entire room. And the sort of the central theme is the experience of Black women during the Jim Crow era. And Brenda will speak more about the sort of historical aspects of it, but that's sort of the key idea. All of my work is always very personal. So for me, although it speaks about the Black female experience generally, it really started with my own sort of personal history, going through my family archive, and just really wanting to explore my connection to the past. And sort of that's what you see reflected here in terms of my sort of thought process and what was in my mind as I was creating the work. In addition to the wallpaper, which is hand-drawn and printed on ink, we also have some pieces of furniture, some ready-made sculpture, some framed photography as well, and all of that Brenda and I collaborated to kind of put together into this work. And Brenda, I'll pass it on to you to take it from there.
Well, hello to everyone, first of all, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you all, and especially with Carla as we talk again about our piece. I'm a social historian, and my work focuses a lot on women, African American and African diasporic women in particular. And so I received, I think it was in 2015, a Guggenheim to write a book on enslaved women. And from that and other things that I was doing, I became interested in just how I could look at women in another form other than the stories that I tell in my books and the research that I do about them, et cetera, et cetera. And about the same time, a little bit later, perhaps, Carla was coming to UCLA to the MFA program. And so I began to think, well, maybe we could possibly do something together. And I was blown away by her thesis project, which was a wallpaper. And so I came to her and I said, do you want to try to do something together at some point? And of course, she wonderfully said yes. Dutifully as my niece too. But then, so I said, what should we think about? And I really want to do something that has a wallpaper in and all that. So we came up with this idea of having a 5-part installation piece, and this is the first part of it. And we talked about looking at specific time periods in African American women's history. And the middle portion, of course, of that history is the Jim Crow era. And that's how we came to Jim Crow. So my assignment basically, or what I wanted to do, was look at images of women Black women doing the Jim Crow era. And we would look at all of them and see how they might speak to each other. And so I looked at images, we went through a lot of them, we decided which ones we wanted. We went out and we looked for the furniture from the time period as well. And then of course, Carla worked her brilliant magic and came up with this wallpaper that you see. And so it's been just a wonderful, wonderful experience for me to take something that usually is written, and that's something that usually is, comes out of years of research and the archive and all of that, and to see it actually visually outside of the published book or the published article or whatever, and to work with someone who understands how to translate that material to a larger audience, and to do so not only brilliantly, but beautifully in this kind of installation that you see here. And on the table, we'll talk about some of the images, but on the table that you see before you, there's a framed photograph, and that is of my mother and Carla's grandmother. And so this image is a little bit different from what you'll see actually with the other chair, because we had a larger space to begin with. And as Carla said, the installation kind of grows and shrinks according to the space that we have. And so we had different chairs that we used for this one. We had a mirror in this one as well. And when we came around to doing it in the Rose Gallery the second time, I had already incorporated the chairs into my living room, so we couldn't use that again. So we had to go out and find another chair. So it's been really just a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. And I'm looking forward, we've already designed part 2, and we're looking forward to when, you know, we can do so outside of COVID, having that mounted as well. That's me.
All right, so why don't we just kind of quickly run through some of the images so people can see a sort of a close-up of what the panels look like, and then we'll start the Q&A. So, as Brenda mentioned, you know, we've shown the initial installment of Bitter Earth in a few different spaces, and so it is modular, so it kind of bends and forms and shapes to the site, the space available. So this says, she mentions the second space where we have a mirror, but there are some key elements that remain no matter what the space. The wallpaper being number one, that's sort of the foundational core element of the work. In addition, we also have some framed images that stay with the work as well, that these hang on the walls. Some of them are repeated in the wallpaper, some of them are new, but all of them are of the Jim Crow era, key moments, key figures of the Jim Crow era. And here again, we also have some images from my family archive. That's my grandmother and all her sisters there in the lower left-hand corner. So the panels themselves, just as sort of the Jim Crow era span several decades, we wanted to pick images that span several decades as well. And so we also wanted to kind of capture various aspects of the Black woman experience in the Jim Crow era. So you'll see in the photographs images of domestic life, images of children, schooling, protest, marriage, celebrity figures, sort of everything that kind of runs the gamut, because, you know, as any human experience is incredibly complex. There's highs, there's lows, there's troubles, and there's also moments of celebration. And that would be important to include all of those things within this work in order to kind of make it really grounded and human and really respect what a true experience is like. Most of the photographs here were sourced from the Library of Congress. As I said, some of them are figures you'll recognize. For example, this here is quote unquote Jim Crow, who was, correct me if I'm wrong, Brenda, is this from an advertisement?
This is an advertisement from one of the shows. These, what were called coon shows at the time. And so, yes, this is an advertisement for this Jim Crow image, which is very early, actually. It's in the 1840s. And so Jim Crow, we think of as starting after, at the end of the 19th century or after Reconstruction, certainly. But this image itself comes from an earlier period during the antebellum period of our history.
So a few more sample images here. In terms of notable figures, you'll recognize her from Gone with the Wind. The mirrored photo there, that's Jackie Robinson. And, you know, there's a sort of a mixture of everyday people as well as people you recognize, and so on.
Can you tell, sorry to interrupt, can you tell us about the aviator? I'm fascinated by that image, actually.
Sure, let me click back to it. Actually, Brenda, why don't you, to know that you selected this one.
That's Bessie Coleman, of course, the first Black female, well-known aviator from the time period of the Jim Crow era. And it is a fascinating image. And we wanted to contrast her in particular with these other two women because she is kind of the epitome of education, of the middle class, of someone who has literally flown off into the world. And it's contrasted with a woman who's in the center who's actually a sharecropper, and she's looking up to the sky. Bessie Coleman is actually in the sky, and of course we have then Hattie McDaniel as well, who is the first Black woman to win an Oscar. So these are really three very quite contrasting images of Black womanhood during the Jim Crow era, and they all existed, and they all relate to one another in the kinds of bitterness of life as a Black person, as a Black woman during this time period. You see, I threw in that bitter.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's another good point as well, is that we, each of these squares that you see is 24 inches by 24 inches, and they repeat down the strip to make a strip of the wallpaper. And we kind of put 2 images in each strip intentionally, because we want each image to kind of speak to each other, so that not only does the entire piece tell a story, but each individual strip of wallpaper tells a story as well. And so it kind of echoes and reinforces the narrative of the work as you kind of walk through it. Like, for example, here we have the images of protest, people talking about integrated schools, sort of in contrast with the picture of the one-room class, the one-room classroom, segregated classroom. I should also, talk a little about the pattern itself. It's a floral print. The background is a garden. There are some elements in there that are from our family archive as well. For example, the pomegranates, which are a key fruit of South Carolina, where my maternal family is from. So also sort of floral trellis print, the bluebird or the blue jay, as well. And I wanted to kind of speak to sort of the idea of sort of these kind of coming out of the earth as a reference to kind of, the growth and sort of the experience and growing up in this era with all these sort of images sort of inundating you or being around you. Yep. And yeah, that's really it, all I have to say. So maybe Michelle will pass it back over to you for the Q&A.
Sure. Actually, for the Q&A, if you don't mind, I think a lot of people, and thank you for this. This is really wonderful to be able to see your work. As I said, as soon as I saw your work on Platform LA, I reached out to Luis to understand more about the work and who you are and your background. So this is really great to have you here. Would you mind actually sharing the screen again, just to have the work up, if that's okay? Because I wonder if we can, if you don't mind, audience, and Professor Stevenson and Carla, to go through and look at some of these images to really kind of sit with them and understand what they are and the stories behind them. And for example, this one here, I'm curious about how you decided to juxtapose images. And this is interesting because I feel like I should know who this baby is. I'm not sure if everybody does know who's on our Zoom, who some of the people are in the images and their significance.
Well, Carla and I we went through a lot of images because there were really a lot of fantastic images in the Library of Congress. Some of the images are also from the W.B. Du Bois collection that he took in preparation for an exposition that showed Black life during this time period. But we had a difficult time trying to decide on our themes, our basic themes, because we had a lot of images. We came down to not having enough space. Carla will tell you I always like more, more, more. She had to push back on me and said, no, Brem, we've just gotta, make it clear, a little bit clearer than that. So we don't know who the baby is. She's a sharecropper family's baby, but we just love that baby face. We thought that was wonderful. But she's looking forward, but she's looking forward perhaps to a life of a domestic servant. And so you can see how that's contrasted there, because at the time of the Jim Crow era, the large majority of Black women who were employed outside of agricultural work were employed as domestics. And so that's a reality of her, her forthcoming life, that this little girl. And so we thought it was important for people to kind of see how the ambitions of Black children were so curtailed during this time period. But I also wanted to ask Carla to talk a little bit more about some of the symbols in her wallpaper, because there's the cotton, there's the cross, there's the blood. Can you talk just a little bit, because you were so wonderful in bringing together all these images.
Certainly. Yeah, I tried to build meaning or intention into sort of as many aspects or facets of the project as possible, so that, you know, it conveys a message both sort of at the macro and the micro level. So as I mentioned, it's a floral trellis print, sort of reminiscent of a garden. And within it, you'll see the pomegranates, which are endemic to South Carolina, where my maternal family is from. You also see the cotton flowers, which kind of speak to the agrarian South. Even, you know, post-Civil War, post-slavery, picking cotton and working the cotton fields was a major sort of source of labor for Black people in that area in this time. In addition to that, we have a small cross here, kind of referencing to religiosity during Black people during the time. The birds kind of speak or a symbol of femininity for me. And then in addition to that, we also have a little splatter of blood here at the bottom, which kind of references sort of the violence of the era that was inescapable for many.
Mm-hmm.
And you designed the wallpaper yourself?
I did, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant.
That's fantastic.
You
You had mentioned this is a 5-part series, so I'm curious, you know, so 5 historical time periods, right? And so this is Jim Crow, and I'm curious about the others that you have in mind. I don't know if you've mapped them all out yet, but I'm curious about that.
We have mapped them out. So the piece that we've just finished has to deal with, it deals with Africa and Middle Passage and the beginning of the slave era. And that is, we think of as our first piece in terms of the chronology. And then we're going to also be looking at the Civil Rights era. Okay. And we are going to be looking specifically at the antebellum period of slavery. And then we're going to look at contemporary towards the future too. So we have a lot of work to do, but we look forward to it. We are very much passionate about it.
Absolutely, and I'll just add that each era is going to be a different room. For example, the Africa Middle Passage piece, the second installment that we just completed, is formed to resemble a dining room, a formal dining room of the period, which is, I think we said late 1700s, and so.
Up until the time of the American Revolution.
Yes, exactly. And then sort of the next, so going forward, we'll match one era to one room, a kitchen, a bedroom, an outdoor space, so that when all of the installations are complete and stitched together, it'll be a complete home. So they're all sort of building blocks to one sort of big installation that will interconnect. Are
you finding in any way that current times are influencing how you're thinking about history? I mean, earlier in the preparation, we were talking, and all noticing that we wore the same color today, unplanned, and also thinking about the historic nature of Kamala Harris being nominated to be the vice president of the Democratic Party, right? Vice President of the United States, which is really exciting and a historic event. And so I'm wondering, you know, if and that's brand new, right? And I think we're all still processing, you know, that historic nomination and achievement. But I'm wondering how like current events are influencing how you're thinking about the history as you're making the work, or if they do.
I'll say I don't think it's really influenced to date how I create the work. Perhaps when we start getting towards more contemporary sections of this installation, or perhaps, you know, because I finished the second installment late last year, so I haven't really been sort of creating specifically in the space of this project over the past few months. So perhaps when I pick it back up, it will. But today I won't say that it's really influenced me. I will say it has got me thinking more about how it's presented and how it's will be received, because I feel like, this sort of work is very challenging. And I feel like in this day and age where we're surrounded by so many complex and challenging and in some cases tragic and horrific things all the time, that I think I want to be mindful, or challenge myself to be mindful about how this is presented and the context around it and the conversation around it as well.
Mm-hmm. I do also think that when we get to the piece that deals with contemporary and future, we will certainly, focus on women who have been involved in our political system and where that is going, where that's been and where that's going. And so certainly Kamala Harris, whether or not she becomes vice president or not, will figure in some way, shape, or form into that conversation that's then translated into, the visual work that you will see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too, because I was thinking about the 1619 project, right? And you were talking about the first time period going up to 1776. And it's interesting, this reframing of when is really the founding of the modern United States, or, however we're thinking of, where we're living today. And so that's been interesting to me. And I think for a lot of people to start to reconsider, other time periods. And so again, I think, that project coming to the fore, just wondered how that it may be influencing your thinking as well, although it may not have in that project. But
well, for me, 1619 is really important, and for Carla too, because our family's actually from that part of Virginia where those 30 or so, they say 20 and odd, but it's closer to 30 Black people arrived, Africans arrived from Central Western Africa in 1619. So for us, that's really the beginning too, because we're also from Virginia and about 10 miles away from that actual site. And so I think about 1619 a lot. I did put on a lot of programs, 3 conferences, 3 events at the Hammer Museum on 1619. I've written about it extensively. So that, will influence it, but that's also influenced the installation piece that we have ready to go, because that was the Middle Passage. And we were actually thinking about, we were going to show it, in 2019, 2020, as a reference to 1619. But it will still reflect on 1619 to a certain extent when we actually do show it, because some of the images that are used there are slave ships and, maps of the time period, the map, a part of 17th century Virginia map and all of that. So it was certainly reflected, 1619 will certainly reflect a little bit in that piece as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I'm just really interested in general and what we decide to remember and who documents our history and who gets kind of a voice and what mattered in the past and kind of what influences the future or even the present. And so I think kind of that core idea is also part of what attracted me to the work in general. This idea to have these sort of 2 Black female voices speaking on Black female history, elevating figures of our history to the national or even the international stage, and kind of putting serious scholarship and thought around it. Not that it hasn't done in the past, but that there's always need and room for more. And I think just participating in that conversation, that historical conversation is important and part of what drew me to this work.
Mm-hmm. That's great. There's a related comment in the chat here from James Leventhal, who said, as you just alluded to, you said you were concerned about the context of the display. And there are, some violent images here. And, when you think about the audience, who do you care about most as the viewers? And related to that, who do you most want to be sure is, seeing this portion of the project?
So I will say that for me, I don't have a selected audience. I think sort of the idea here is that the experience of Black women is the starting point. It's the central piece. And then my hope is that it'll spark conversations with whoever sees it and with various cultures and communities. I think that, as a Black artist, I always like to be mindful and respectful and include Black audiences or consider Black audiences in my work. But I won't say that, or in my mind, this is not exclusively for them. This is something that I hope speaks to a wide variety of people. That being said, though, I did give thought that to this not becoming just I guess, another depressing work of with Black bodies and these sort of tortured, sort of violent images. I didn't want it to become like a spectacle in that way, especially since, you know, my work is generally shown in sort of wealthier, primarily white institutions. And so for that reason, we were thoughtful to include images like Jackie Robinson, like Dinah Washington, images of Black success, Black celebration, you know, Black love. There's a couple, there's an image further in here that of a couple there of Black people that are dancing. So it kind of truly reflects the real complexity of Black life and all the highs and the lows. And it's not just a series of images of violence being done to Black bodies.
And I think Carla and I, in terms of our conversation, we really had to work out some things with regard to what's covered, what's not covered. For me as a historian, I want it from all different perspectives, but I want it from all different perspectives of the subject, that is, of the Black woman. So I want to make certain, for example, that we have the image of Laura Nelson, who was the woman who has been hanged here because women were lynched, but people, very few people knew that women were lynched. Very few people think about Black women in the criminal justice system. It's really more and more about, you know, the other genders of people versus Black women. And so I have written a book about Black women in the criminal justice system. I really wanted to make certain that people realized that women were on work farms, really women were lynched, women were, you know, beaten. They were, all these things that were experienced by the quote unquote Black race included Black women too. But along with that too, you know, showing The Aviator and showing the Oscar winner and showing, you know, the mother who's at home with her children or teaching her children. We wanted to have as many voices speak as possible, you know, and I don't have an audience. I want the world, the globe, to know more about the Black female experience. It is a human experience. It's a gendered experience, but it's a human experience. It's a class experience. You know, it's a racial experience, but it is the experience of the world when you talk about Black women. So there's always women within a society who are oppressed. There's always women who are elevated. There, you know, so there are all these things happening in every society, in every group. So I think it speaks very broadly across nationhood, across race, across class, educational level, etc., to these people.
And I'm curious, I want to continue to talk about Bitter Earth, but I know that, Carla, you have other work that you've created as well. And I'm curious about how other work that you've created relates to this project or is different, if you want to kind of share and discuss some of that as well.
Certainly. So I always work on 2 projects simultaneously. That's just my process. So right now I have Bitter Earth that we've all been discussing, and then I also have a second body of work called Celestial Bodies that are individual pieces, and that they're kind of interrelated in terms of the theme. So, and they're also a theme and process. So all of my work that I'm making, all my contemporary work, is an interplay between photography, like it starts with a photograph, and then sort of I draw and I paint digitally over top of it, and collage as well. Actually, I think I might have a sample here. If we scroll through, I can show you. It'd be easier to see. Ah, here we go. Yeah. So here's an example of one of my works from the Celestial Body series. And it's all, like I said, I would make very personal work. So the Black experience is always very central to what I'm creating. This work was inspired by mythology. And so the central idea of it, I feel like Black people, people of color are typically portrayed as other or outside. And so the idea of this piece is to kind of take a second look at mythology and recreate it, or create my own sort of story of creation that has Black bodies at the center. So that's sort of the key idea. And you're seeing the sort of one of the newer pieces in the series called The Ways of Gods. And it's sort of just the first of a new wave of pieces, all of that sort of central idea. So if you see my work, this is what you're going to be seeing.
It's a gorgeous piece.
Sure.
It's one of my favorites.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so, so can you talk to us a little bit about the mythology that you have created? Have you kind of mapped out the characters, or is it kind of more a universe you've created, or how do you think of it? I'm curious.
It's ever evolving. I sort of started with just kind of looking at Greco-Roman mythology, which I studied in the past, and kind of doing my own play on the figures and those narratives. And it's sort of over the time I've started to evolve my own. I don't feel like it's really firm enough to share at the moment, but creating my own narrative with my own set of characters is where I'm going next.
Absolutely. And I think, James had another question in the chat, was thinking about, how your other work responds to the same question that you mentioned about spectacle and magic, and Black bodies being at the center. And this it almost feels like an outgrowth maybe in terms of what, you're working on the other project, Bitter Earth, with images that are incredibly violent and rooted in the past in many ways, which continues to be the present. But then also, this is a new landscape and a new world in some ways. And I'm wondering about the interplay between the series.
Absolutely, and you're right. This is sort of an evolution, or as an outgrowth, I guess is sort of a better way to say it, from Bitter Earth. And this is, for me, well, it's much more recent. So it's something I've been working on just for the past few months. So I feel like perhaps it's a bit more intertwined with temporary reality. And it's for me, it's my work as a refuge. So I think you kind of see that reflected here. It's a bit, I feel a bit more inspirational. And, I like the idea that, well, I don't like the idea, but perhaps we can't see around us a world in which, a world of peace, but perhaps we can imagine a space in which equality and peace are possible. And so that's sort of what's kind of on my mind, I suppose, as I've been making these newer works.
And this is, just to talk technically a little bit, this is also partially photography in some ways. Can you talk about that a bit, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. So photography remains kind of, I guess, a core aspect of my work. I always start there. Well, I have a overthinking practice. So I do research and some writing at first, but in terms of when I start making, the first thing I make is a photograph. So in this particular image, the couple here was shot in a studio against a green screen. Those are sort of so underneath these two figures is a black and white photograph that was shot on film, medium format film, and then scanned to the computer. And then from there, I do the pattern work. This pattern was created individually and drawn, and then I collaged it on top of here. Same thing with all the other elements here. You see, they're drawings that have been created either by myself or that I've acquired that are drawn and then scanned in and sort of mapped onto or collaged into this space. Same with the color. I sort of do some digital drawing, digital painting on top of this. And then once that's complete, it's printed and I do some handwork with acrylics over this final piece so that each one is a little bit unique.
And that's why the colors seem so bright on the red and the gold on the right and in the right-hand corner in terms of the handwork with the acrylics. They really pop.
That's actually on the computer, actually. Well,
really?
Okay. It was drawn and then collaged into the computer. The color here, the grasses, all of this. Yeah. These things, the little stars here, those are done with paint once it's printed.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us.
No problem.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see your practice has so many different visual elements and components. The photography, the painting work, the layering and the collage, it's really complex. And it's interesting because it's not entirely the same, but it is similar to Bitter Earth, but it manifests itself quite differently. And, you know, because you have the wallpaper and then you have the photographic images as well, the more clearly photographic historical images.
Yeah, well, maybe it sounds complex, but to me it seems really simple.
We're all admiring it, so I can see from the chat, everyone's saying, you know, it's stunning, it's magical, it's beautiful. I love this
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you know, after I left grad school, I left behind like this big sort of studio space that was a luxury while I was in school. And so since that time, I've trying to figure out a way to work just within my home. And so, you know, scanning my work into the computer and doing like a lot of experimentation digitally really opened up a lot of doors and space for me. It also met a lot of pragmatic and practical requirements for me as well. So I just have, I have complete control over the piece, the surface. All I really need is a computer to complete it. And so for me, that it was a big relief kind of coming to this point. So for me, it feels, I guess, simple or small.
Computer and an imagination and the skills and the skills and the visual understanding to create. It's wonderful. I wanted to kind of ask the two of you again, just to kind of turn back to working together and what that was like, if you don't mind talking about that, and collaborating with one another, and you know, how do you share ideas and vision together, and that experience.
Sure. Well, for me, it really added a new depth and to my work. So I did not study history. I've had an interest in it, but I'm very much a casual, like novice casual historian. So partnering with Brenda really helped me. I should say really was essential in the creation of Bitter Earth, because you know that we are talking about real lives, real women, the truth of the Black experience, which is complex and does have a lot of nuance to it. And so I think her expertise there was really essential in creating a work that I am proud to share and comfortable to share. I also feel like it kind of not only sort of, I wouldn't say grounded my ideas, but I feel like it just makes the piece so much more real and evocative than if it were entirely imaginary. Not to say that my other work isn't evocative, but it just, for that specific subject matter, I feel like having, being able to talk about real life experience was really essential.
I thought it was really wonderful to work with Carla. I've always enjoyed her work. It's beautiful, it's brilliant, it just moves you in so many different ways. And her entire family they're all wonderful artists. Her father's a musician, her sister is a screenwriter, and her mother is an artist of all different sorts, but more recently as a writer of children's books. And I believe that Carla first learned photography working with her mother, who was an amateur photographer when Carla was in high school or middle school. I can't remember now. And so it was just wonderful for me to work outside of the box of academia to a certain extent, but also to bring that into it. And we didn't have clashes. I think we both understood that we approached it differently, and we both really appreciated what we had to bring to it. And I was just amazed at how I could take, you know, this history and make it something that was that people could digest in a different kind of way. And I was very anxious I wanted to do that. And the first people I think who saw when we first had our very small, soft opening was a class that I was teaching on African American history, because we really wanted to see, and we actually documented. Carla's sister Erica filmed their reactions to it and all of that. We really wanted to see if people could relate to it from all different classes and races and ethnicities, etc. And then we showed part of it when we went to Granada, Spain, which was a lot of fun too. And so it's just been a wonderful experience for me to work outside of, you know, the archive in a way, and to work outside of writing and telling these stories in that kind of way. It's to see a beautiful depiction of it, even if it is a bittersweet depiction.
Can you say more about Spain? I heard you say you went to Granada, Spain with this project.
Yeah, we went to Granada, Spain with this project to the conference, the Inclusive Museum Conference. And we really wanted to see how people globally, responded to it and talked to us about it, interacted with us about it. And we were supposed to have our new iteration at that conference in Lisbon in a couple of weeks. But of course, now we won't be able to travel because of COVID. So it was really a wonderful experience to see it within also the context of Granada and of course the influence of the Islamic world on Granada and the European world on Granada. So it was really just a fantastic way of saying, okay, we've taken it on the road and across the ocean and all of that. And I think Carla can talk a little bit about when it showed in Paris as part of a larger show in Paris too.
Yeah, please.
It was just at an art fair, Paris Photo, 2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Just that.
Yeah. And I also just wanted to add that in terms of our collaboration, I feel like we both really at the core had the same goal. We were looking for a new way to present our work and to activate it and connect with a new audience. And so I think since we were both in the same accord in terms of where we were headed, that there's just the journey and getting there was much more smooth because we were kind of aligned on what we wanted to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the moment when you knew you had something? When you knew, when you had conceived of this project? It did take a kind of a long time to pull together, just in the thought process. I'm just curious about that.
Well, I knew that we had something when Carla said she could do something with me when I asked if you wanted to do something together, because I was completely, as I said, blown away by her thesis project. I thought it was just a beautiful and brilliant thesis project. And so I knew that if I was going to do anything with her, it was going to be great and wonderful. And so when she said, oh, I think, yeah, that we should do that, I was like, yay. I was very, very pleased from that moment forward.
Yeah, and I think once we came together and decided to do something, it all kind of came together pretty quickly. It was kind of amazing how it just kind of clicked and sort of flowed, I think, from initial sketches till installation was only like, less than half a year.
Yeah, we started in January and we showed it. Well, I guess we first started showing it in early August. So yeah. We did definitely click, but having been together for many years as relatives.
Yeah. Probably helped.
Yeah. So I'm curious if there are questions from the audience. Feel free to add them to the chat if you have questions, and I'm happy to read them out. Take them if people have questions about the process, or while the audience is thinking, I'm curious. I don't know about the Inclusive Museum Conference. I'm curious about what that is, and if you wouldn't mind sharing that with the group here.
Well, it's just, I was looking for a place for us to show, to a larger audience this piece. So I found the Inclusive Museum Conference, which actually everyone seemed to know about except for me. But, it brings people from around the globe together every year, and they talk about the ways in which you can make museum pieces, or you can make art more available to when people walk into museums, and that a broader audience that's welcomed into the museum and wants to come to the museum. And so when we showed this, it was in Granada. I think last year was in Argentina. And then this year it's going to be in Lisbon. So one year though, it was at the Autry Museum in Los Angeles as well. So it does literally go around the globe, and it does have a global audience, and people who show up to participate are from around the globe as well.
Yeah, it was really interesting experience, at least for me. I don't often do sort of academic conferences. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I really enjoyed going and meeting the other artists, historians, and everyone else who participated. They had some really interesting projects. Remember, there are some people in Canada who are working with integrating sort of First Nation artifacts into the museum. There is a work by some Italian historians who were sort of dealing with encouraging participation and attendance with UNESCO sites. So it was just really, was a very diverse in terms of the work that was being done, but it's all really, really interesting.
Okay, so I have a few questions here in the chat. And one question is, if you guys wouldn't mind, or Carla, if you wouldn't mind, showing the wallpaper and the images again from Bitter Earth. People really want to linger on the images and take a look at those while we are answering questions, if that's okay.
No, that's fine. I'll just click through.
Okay, sure. Or you could even, just leave it on, one set for a little bit and have people just really kind of linger and absorb. I think for some people, I don't know all of these images, and I think for a lot of people, this is our history, and yet we're not aware of it, which is why it's so important to bring it to the fore. And so that's one of the reasons I think people would like to see and understand what these are and absorb.
I can go through just show just as on this page we have the Jim Crow, and then in the middle we have an image of a woman who took care of a child. So we have that kind of iconic image of the Black nanny. And then over at the left, this was actually a cartoon image for a cartoon, and it deals with the whole issue of colorism as well as race, as well as beauty. And so, but this kind of indoctrination to what is beautiful begins at a very early age, and so this was a cartoon for a soap that was, a fairy dust soap or something. I can't remember the name of the brand now, where, this little Caucasian girl is basically saying to this little African-American girl, don't you want to have, fairy looking skin like mine? This is a soap that you use, so that's sort of like on the surface of what it's saying, but for an audience, you may respond to it as also it deals with colorism, or it deals with the notion of white and beauty, and and because of the difference in the way that they're dressed, and also in class, and those kinds of things. So there's a lot within these three images. Of course, Jim Crow was in the center of the piece, the panel with the Jim Crow, because it was about the Jim Crow era.
And I think that's interesting on the image on the lower right is also really interesting. It's one of people taking care of each other. Looks like braiding hair, also taking care of a baby. This is this image on the lower right here.
Sorry.
Go back, sorry.
Yeah, I also added, this is actually one of the photographs that came out of the Works projects, the WPA in the 1930s. Some of the images from that collection are in the piece as well. I'll also add that I did not include every panel in this PowerPoint. So you're seeing a subset of what we chose for the piece.
And that was really interesting, because when somebody purchased the piece, they wanted it to fit a particular space, and they wanted certain images. And we had a kind of a crisis of what was going to be represented. I mean, would it represent the kind of gamut of images that we wanted the piece in its entirety to indicate, the kind of differences of experience and that kind of thing. So Carla might want to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, I was with her, but she, as the artist, really had a vision of what it should look like, and what, I, as a historian, wanted certain stories to be told, but it was a kind of difficult negotiation.
It was. I will say that, that's kind of, I guess, the outgrowth of it being a site-specific work. It's always easier to scale up, because then you can put more in, but when you have to scale down, for a smaller wall. Then it becomes a challenge about what gets cut out and what stays. So it was quite a bit of back and forth between all of us figuring out what made sense to keep, what made sense to go. But I think in the end, we just wanted to make sure we had sort of the key themes of domesticity, of sort of of Jim Crow, of we wanted
labor work,
labor, and so on, so that we just at least got sort of the key elements of the piece in the space.
And I have a question here in the chat about the Green Book, and someone says, Erica says, I remember seeing Bitter Earth and was really interested in the inclusion of the Green Book. I'm not sure if that image is in this one. And could you both talk about why you included that in the installation? It's in the installation. Maybe it's in the ready-made objects. Maybe that's where the Green Book is.
Correct. Yeah, that's
the ready-made objects, right? Yeah.
Oh, you can't see it on the table, but it is on.
It was supposed to be
on one of and it was in the furniture that's in the installation, and we included it because it was just kind of a really crucial or important element of the era that we felt needed to be reflected. It's something that was important for Black survival during the Jim Crow era, and so we didn't think it would really sort of, it needed to be, we felt it needed to be a part of the piece, which really reflect the experience.
It really spoke to the limited spaces that African Americans, that we could occupy. You know, you could not, my husband and I were just talking about this, about there was an old photograph and we were on a lake because you couldn't go to the ocean. And we lived, 10 miles away from the ocean. We lived 10 miles away from the Atlantic Ocean in Virginia, but the ocean was not a Black space. It was white space, and you couldn't go to Virginia Beach, and you couldn't go to the beaches in Norfolk or wherever. You had to go to a man-made lake that was the colored people's lake, etc. So if you're traveling, you need to know these kinds of things, particularly if you're going to be some kind of tourist or something. If you're going to visit your relatives, you have to stay in a hotel. What hotels can you stay in? What restaurants can you go to eat? What places you can go to actually, be able to use the men's room or the women's room. And so the Green Book was absolutely essential, particularly if you were going to be traveling in the South or in many places, even California. There were lots of restrictions with regard to where Black people could be. We have the image, for example, of Hattie McDaniel, and she won the Oscar, but of course she was in a segregated space when she won the Oscar. She was not allowed to sit out with the rest of the people who were there at the time. So, so the green rooms, the Green Books allowed for people to know exactly where they could be, and hopefully that would keep them from being harmed.
Thank you for explaining more about the Green Book. There was the popular movie that won Oscar acclaim with Mahershala Ali. And I would say there's the artist Jonathan Calm, if people have heard of Jonathan Calm on this talk, but he's represented by Rena Branston Gallery, and I see Jenny Bay is here from Rena Branston, so I'll give a shout out there. But Jonathan's a professor at Stanford, and he has a project that's about the Green Book that he's been working on and thinking about Black mobility and automobility. And so it'll be interesting to see, how that project develops, but a specific photographic project looking at the Green Book and going back and looking at those spaces today. Let's see, I have, in the chat, there is a question for Dr. Stevenson. So it says here, I only just learned recently that Currier and Ives had a whole popular series of images that says, ... I never learned this when I learned either American art history or popular history, or, when did they bury these images?
Of Black people that are, there are lots of images that, that's another issue about about the Jim Crow era is these images of Black people, these images of Black life were very popular throughout the South. Some of them were more sentimental, and some of them were more violent. And so, for example, the image of the hanged woman was on a postcard that was sent, because lynchings often were used as photographs of them used as postcards that people would just send as if, you know, any around and around and around. And I have an image in a book that I'm just finishing now that's just called America. It's from 1841, and it is the image, a beautiful painted image of family, of Black and white family life in the South. And so these were why people were still enslaved. So there's the Black family and the little dog, and then there's a white family. And so these images were very popular because and what they did was that they assuaged people's guilt about the treatment of Black people, either by saying that Black people are treated well, or Black people have nice lives within their culture, quote unquote culture, or that that this is that they don't deserve this in one way, shape, or form. And so the notion this Black woman being hanged, for example, is about Black criminality and Black female criminality, and how Black women also are a threat. And so we have, you know, tremendous numbers of images about Black people that were meant to make, in terms of our racial etiquette and our racial hierarchy, people feel who were on the side of the power feel comfortable with that. And there was a wonderful show at CAM, at California African American Museum, that I helped to curate on the Mammy image, for example, and images from motion picture, early motion picture, and all of that. And so whether or not Mammy was, and these Jim Crow images were found not only in Curious Eyes, but also on post boxes, on lunch boxes, on doormats, on towels, on the covers for toasters. You know, they were found everywhere you might imagine. And so it was reiterating our racial hierarchy within the society. And a lot of them were actually made in Asia. Because it was a huge market for it globally, not just in the United States. And of course, you find it on quote unquote China pieces and all that too. Mm-hmm.
And I'll just add, you know, these images were very popular, but they are considered quote unquote vernacular images. It's really only been recently, in recent sort of art history and contemporary art, that they've kind of, images of Black people have been collected, elevated to institutions, and kind of seen as something that should be remembered. And so I think that also kind of plays into the key theme of the piece, or a key question of this piece, which is what is remembered and what is important enough to be documented and what isn't.
Mm-hmm. That actually relates to a question that was that came to me as to were there any new histories, anything that you learned in this process, or new histories revealed or discovered? I feel like that's a loaded question in some ways. I'm speaking to a renowned historian, but maybe a different way of looking at something, or something you were surprised to come across or to find in the archive, maybe.
I'm not sure if I found anything new. I was very familiar with the Jim Crow era. It's a very, very long era. I think that's what most people don't understand. I mean, even before Reconstruction, Jim Crow was the law, literally the law and the custom of the day in the rest of the United States during the slave era. So for those people who were not enslaved, and there were about 10% of the Black population that was not enslaved in the 1800s prior to the Civil War, Jim Crow existed everywhere for them in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, New Jersey, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Oregon, California, everywhere where Black people were, Jim Crow, that is racial segregation, spatialized in terms of one's access to certain spaces or one's resources, they were very much in place. And so for me, it just reiterated how long the period of Jim Crow was. And of course, when we're talking about doing a project, it's very difficult to talk about having a project that begins really in, 1615, 1619, I should say, and comes all the way through up until, the 1960s, up to 1969. I think schools in Virginia where I was living were integrated in 1969. And so we're talking about a huge, long period to cover. So that to me was something that I had to rethink.
I'm curious how you manage that, because I know this is a 5-part project and it seems like maybe some of it's overlapping times and then some of it just conceptual. And it may be that, for other time periods you have, I don't know if you excise Jim Crow, but it's been there for the longest time and it's still with us in some ways. It's complex.
I think that, I was going to say that, I think that's sort of interwoven into the sort of the 5 installations, and that they are meant to interconnect when you see them, when they're all included and you see them together. So there is no solid line between the very beginning and the end of Jim Crow, depending on where you were, who you were, etc. It kind of sort of phased in and phased out. In some ways, it kind of still exists. So it'll all be kind of interwoven and they kind of build on each other once it's all together.
Okay, thank you. More questions as to the images and understanding what they are. I think beginning with the set that's prior to this one. I think there's the one that has the suffragettes, or they might be actually women protesting lynching.
Oh, these are actually people who are protesting in the civil rights movement. Okay, so although there are Black suffragettes. But I'm not sure if we have an image of a Black suffragette.
Maybe the one before.
Okay.
No?
Okay, we looked at this one. Okay, this one. I'm sorry, we're kind of jumping around a bit. Okay, we can look. Yeah, this is.
Oh, yes, you're looking at this image of these women here who are, right, they are in a suffragette organization or women's club organization or alumni. And because there's a kind of overlap, there's an intersection of all these different kinds of social justice initiatives that you find in these clubs and these groups of women. And of course, part of this image too captures the real emphasis on the politics of respectability, of being very respectable during this time period. As you see the image over to the left of the criminal, all right, people were fighting mightily against that image. These are educated women, college educated women who are going out to the world to show, Black talent, Black beauty, and a Black sense of justice and morality. So.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, thank you for explaining that. And the term suffragette, I think we don't use anymore, actually. It's, people who are working for women's suffrage. I think suffragette is actually a term that's meant to demean in many ways. It's kind of what I've learned recently.
And it's 100th anniversary, so.
Coming up.
And no, of the women's vote, right, yes.
Coming
up, right,
I feel like it's the 18th is the day. I'm supposed to write a blog post about it. That's why.
Exactly, yes.
Rosa Parks, right? After having been arrested.
Image of Rosa Parks and, her being booked into the Montgomery jail for refusing to get out of her seat.
And there is an amazing drawing by the artist Lava Thomas of this exact image. It's actually, I think, 13 women who were arrested. And the stories I learned is that they all dressed up in their business clothes. So that there was a different image of criminality. It was really clear that they wanted to be photographed and they wanted the press and everyone to see what, who they were and what they really stood for. So this is a really powerful image.
It is a very powerful image, and Rosa Parks, of course, had a lot of status within the African American community, and she was a well-known seamstress throughout Montgomery. She was a part of the NAACP, and she had trained just for this moment. She was chosen specifically for this moment, but she would have always dressed nicely because she was a seamstress. She was middle class, and also because she was leaving work, which was at a department store, where she sewed for middle class and elite white women. So yeah, she was the person chosen to lead, to be arrested and to start this protest.
Thank you again for all this wonderful history. We're really honored to have the both of you here. The audience, I hope, realizes what a great treat this is to actually hear from Carla and Brenda as well. See another question here. Oh, people are happy.
Oh, good. Thank you. We're happy.
Difficult images, but it's important to talk about the history. Any other questions here from the audience? We're coming up on about 10 minutes left. I'm wondering, Carla, if there's anything else that you'd like to share with us, or Brenda, that you'd like to share? Just
I would like to talk about her wonderful work.
I don't have anything else.
Okay, I have some technical questions for you, actually,
Okay.
which has to do with, let's see, Dave asked a question a while back here, and it has to do with the celestial bodies work. And I saw you put together a timeline. I don't know if you wanted to show us that too.
Oh, I kind of talked over it. It was just really, it's a summary slide I used actually for another talk about my career and history of my art practice. But I kind of gave you like an overview of it when I was doing my intro.
Got it.
So
I think it's exciting that this image in the lower right here was recently acquired by the California African American Museum. It's again another beautiful image. I don't know if people can see that. And the question here has to do with, given the layered digital analog nature of this work, was it important for you to work with quote unquote film?
I always preferred film to digital photography. I might be the only person in my generation that feels that way, I don't know, but I do. For me, it's important to my process because I feel like it forces me to slow down and be very considerate with what I shoot and how I shoot it, and just be more mindful of what I'm doing in the moment. When I shoot digitally, I feel like I have too many options. I have too many backups, or it's too much of an easy out. Whereas with film, I really have to be present. I feel like I get better, stronger images that way. And I still enjoy going to the dark room. It's a fun thing to do.
Well, you're talking to a group here at SF Camerawork that is motivated by the power of the camera. And many of us at some point have been amateur photographers, or are amateur or professional photographers as well. So people really appreciate the reference to film for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's another question that's popping up. It's funny, people pinging back and forth between the different bodies of work. With regard to Bitter Earth, do you know about who took the photographs? Do you know if any photographs were taken by women photographers at all? Do you have a sense of the source of those? And that goes back to the question of, whose gaze is being privileged or seen through?
So some of them we know the photographer, some we don't. So the images that were part of the WA projects, we know the photographer for those. I think there are some pieces, I know there are some photographs in the work from Dorothea Lange.
Right.
So her work is included. Some of the other images, like I said, some we know, some we don't.
Yeah, some of them were acquired by W.B. Du Bois, who had a particular gaze and wanted to have a certain positionality, and worked from that. For to show the world, because they were for a large international exposition. And so he would have directed that photography himself, even though he might not have taken the actual photograph, but he certainly directed it. And of course, right, the Lang photographs are quite famous too, that we see there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just reminded, this is a different time period, but relating to African American history and photography, that I think it's reputed that Frederick Douglass was the most photographed person in the 19th century. I don't know if you guys have heard that or know that to be true. And I think that's interesting, and I'm curious why that is. But thinking about just the relationship between Black people and photography during this time, which might not be one that is often talked about or really well explored.
Well, Frederick Douglass was the most famous Republican in the 19th century, if anyone can believe that now, but it's absolutely correct. He and Abraham Lincoln, and he traveled, unlike Lincoln, he traveled the world, particularly lots of parts of Europe, selling his many editions of his many different autobiographies. There are 3 or 4 of them, and of course raising money and consciousness for the abolitionist movement. And then he becomes a diplomat for the United States as well. So and people really wanted to see the Black man who had been a slave, who was so articulate, who was so important to the abolitionist movement, who actually met in the White House with the president, who became a diplomat. People were very curious about Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass was very proud of the way he looked. I think we can all agree to that in terms of reading his histories. He considered himself a very handsome man, as did many women. And so he liked this image. He was very much interested in creating this image of himself as a handsome, articulate, intelligent person. And so he did that through his writing, through his writing his autobiographical accounts, through his speeches, of course, through his newspapers that he owned and circulated, and through his photographs, as well as his home. And so he was, we think about today of branding ourselves in a particular kind of way and having a certain image, but he definitely was a diva and an image maker of his own image. And so the photograph, I'm sure he considered to be quite his friend.
That's great. I'm wondering if, I'm so curious about the other parts really, and what those are going to look like and how you have those mapped out and all that. I don't know if you could speak to those a little bit more.
Carla, do you want to talk about your wallpaper?
Sure. We can talk a little bit about the second installment since that's been completed. I don't have any images keyed up, so I'll just talk to it a little bit.
That's okay, as long as it's not secret. I would love to hear about it.
No, it's not secret. So like I mentioned, it deals with the Middle Passage, and it's left to a dining room, a specific dining room, that of George Washington and Mount Vernon. And it has sort of these, it's a wallpaper, but it's a thick wallpaper that kind of resembles tapestry a bit. And it is a blue, which mirrors the blue that's in the dining room at Mount Vernon, which is George Washington's estate. And then it has a mixture of sort of the blue from the room and some gold design. And it kind of, it lines the walls, and it has, I don't know if you ever, I guess the best way to describe it is if you've ever seen like a French salon that has the molding, the decorative molding along the walls in the white. And so we've used that as a framing device for the wallpaper as it sort of goes around the room and kind of divided off into sections. We're also going to bring in elements of the West African coast in terms of a centerpiece that has some floral elements from that era, as well, and some African sculpture as well that's in the space.
And we wanted to make sure to include in the wallpaper not only just the images of the bodies, because it's sort of stamped along the way, the images of the bodies that enter into the wallpaper, but also the other items that were exchanged or sold and taken from West Africa, the gold, the ivory, for example. And so that's also a part of what we're hoping to present there. But the notion that this is something that occurs in a dining room has all kinds of images with regard to cannibalism, with regard to desecration of bodies, flesh, blood, etc.
Is that it? Oh, sorry.
It's not gory. It's not, and Paula wants everybody to know it's not gory like that.
No, it's not gory.
Because this is my imagination and her beautiful art translation to a certain extent, and so not my imagination. This is my knowledge of what happened and the way in which she translates to something that's palatable. And
I'll just add that it's been I think a bigger challenge, at least for me, in creating the second installment, because it's a period of horror for Black people, and I think it's important that is shown and understood by everyone who sees the piece, and so it's been sort of important to kind of strike the right tone, the right balance. I don't want to just become something people can kind of complacently stare at and just kind of go about their day. It needs to be something that makes a mark, and that will really sort of come away understanding what this was about, and the true sort of, like I said, tragedy and terror and fault.
And Carla has a new, but Carla has a new. You have named it something other than Bitter Earth. What is the name that you have?
Oh yes, we have a working title, which is Works of Providence, which is a title taken from a poem by Phyllis Wheatley, who was a famous African-American poet during that time period, the late 1700s.
And her life speaks to this particular piece in certain ways.
That was actually my next question, so thank you for asking that, which was, is it also called Bitter Earth? So the working title is Works of Providence. Did you have a chance to visit Mount Burden, or how did you think about kind of researching that space and what it looked like?
So my father was in the military, as we mentioned early on, and he retired to Northern Virginia. He still lives there. I spent like my junior high and high school years there, and I think Mount Burden is like 15 minutes from where we lived, and I've been there many a field trip, so I was very familiar with
Didn't need to visit. It's burned into the consciousness. You've been there many a time.
But I do visit all the time. I write about George Washington and his the people who were enslaved by him, and and I give talks there often about the kinds of work that enslaved women did there and that kind of thing. But George Washington is Carla's 18th century neighbor in terms of the closest of her family home to his family home.
Yeah.
Right. I wonder, we're getting close to our time to end our talk. I've really enjoyed talking with you both this evening and learning so much, and you've shared so much. I wonder if you have any parting words for us that you'd like to share.
Just another thank you to everyone for joining, participating, for taking your time to learn about my work, about our work, and I hope to keep in touch with you all and see you again in the future.
It was really wonderful to have an opportunity to speak to everyone, and I just hope that you all will continue to collect art, continue to make art, and get Carla's work now while it's still affordable.
Okay, I didn't tell her to say that.
I'm the auntie, though, so.
That's from Louise. Can we have a round of applause for Carla and Brenda, Dr. Stevenson?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot. I'm assuming a lot of other people learned a lot as well. We really appreciate the time and energy put into this. And this is, for you, Dr. Stevenson, like a lifetime of work, it feels like, as well, that's gone into this project.
Most definitely. And I'm really glad that I can represent it in a different kind of way, and Carla's helping me to do that.
Yeah, this is such a treat. Dave, should I hand it back to you on behalf of Camerawork?
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for moderating this conversation. Carla, thank you for sharing your work and making a mark with us here at Camerawork. And Professor Stevenson, thank you for sharing your historical insight. Yeah, we all learned a lot. This was incredibly compelling. Thanks also, Christina Graber, as ever, for helping us to produce these programs. And I want to give a shout out to our board members in the room, Dr. Philip Sager and Monique Deschênes. Thank you for your leadership. And of course, thanks to all of you for being here. You are Camerawork, and it's wonderful to share this community with you, even when we're online. Join us tomorrow. We will be back here again for another conversation, this time with Adrian Walker and Curtis Taylor Jr. They'll be expanding on their journeys as Black creatives during COVID-19 and the continuation of tragedies as it relates to Black bodies. So it will be a great continuation of the conversation we've started to have here tonight, and I hope to see you all again. And as ever, we are a member-supported organization, so our ability to bring you these programs hinges on your support. So if you're not a member, please visit our website at sfcamerawork.org. You can join and you can support us in other ways. And of course, we rely on your support by being here at these programs. So thank you again, everybody. We will see you here again soon. And good night.
Good night.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, Carla.